Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that is, well, it's truly fascinating, but honestly, it's deeply chilling. We're going to be diving into some incredible ancient texts and literary masterpieces to uncover this psychological phenomenon that has quietly shaped human history for centuries. We're looking at the terrifying power of blind ideology. Like, how does a belief system get so insanely powerful that it literally overrides reality itself? Let's find out. Okay, let's dive right into this. The core thesis from our source material presents a really terrifying reality. The most dangerous humans seal their reason in the name of truth. Think about that. History's absolute greatest threat isn't the paid villain, the common criminal, or the ruthless mercenary. No, the true danger, it lies in the righteous zealot. It's the person who completely seals off their own capacity to reason, totally abandoning critical thought and compassion, all in the name of what they believe is the absolute unquestionable truth. To really grasp how this works, our source uses this powerful, super visceral motif. Just imagine a thick, suffocating layer of mud. But this isn't just dirt, right? It's like an impenetrable seal right over the human mind. When a person completely melts into a specific ideology, this mud seals their eyes, their ears, and the very doors to their intellect. They become entirely blind and deaf to the actual living, breathing world around them. Literally, even if absolute, undeniable reality, or heck, even the voice of the divine itself, stood right in front of them and said, hey, you're on the wrong path, they just wouldn't accept it. The mud keeps the illusion perfectly intact. Let's see how this builds across the centuries. To prove this thesis, our sources take us on this sweeping, chronological journey. And we're going to use some incredible stories to show exactly how this psychological seal operates across totally different cultures and eras. We're going to travel from the scorching sands of ancient Egypt to the brutal public squares of the Middle Ages, all the way to the freezing, philosophical depths of 19th century Russia. So we begin our journey in antiquity, looking at an account from the ancient Egyptian tale of Sinuhe. Here, we're introduced to a man who suffers just unimaginable horrors at the hands of a tyrant. And this oppressor doesn't just steal the man's property. He brutally assaults his family right in front of his eyes, cruelly mutilates him by actually cutting off his ears and nose, and forces him into grueling slavery. I mean, it is the absolute, systematic destruction of a human life, stripping away every single ounce of his dignity and freedom. But time passes, and eventually this impossibly cruel tyrant dies. Our victim, who is still bearing the heavy physical and emotional scars of his enslavement, stands before the tyrant's grave. And there, carved permanently into the stone for all of eternity, is this blatant piece of regime propaganda. The inscription actually describes this monstrous, sadistic oppressor as, quote, a good and righteous man. It's an absolutely absurd contradiction of literally everything the victim just lived through. And here is the shocking twist. The victim reads this inscription, and instead of feeling, righteous anger or even relief that his tormentor is finally gone, he begins to weep. He falls to his knees and actually begs the gods for forgiveness. Why? He's apologizing for the sin of ever believing his abuser was a cruel man. He completely abandons his own memories, his own pain, and his own mutilated body just to accept the lie written on that stone. Now, what's really interesting about this is why the victim broke in such a bizarre way. It's the ultimate example of ideological brainwashing. See, the ruling ideology of the era had successfully implanted this terrifying belief among the lower classes that anything inscribed on a grave was the literal, unquestionable word of the gods. The victim's ideological conditioning was so impenetrable, that mud over his mind was so thick that it forced him to completely reject his own traumatic, lived reality in favor of the system's narrative. And this is exactly why this matters to us. It shows just how easily human perception can be entirely rewritten by a dominant belief system. Let's fast forward a bit to the Middle Ages. Our source draws on the writings of the Persian poet Attar, detailing the horrific public execution of a famous mystic named al-Hallaj. And the punishment is unimaginably severe. Hallaj is sentenced to receive 300 brutal lashes right in the public square. Just to put that into perspective, this isn't just a beating. This is a death sentence delivered through agonizing, prolonged torture. It's meant to break not just the body, but the spirit of the condemned in front of a watching crowd. But as this horrific beating is taking place, something miraculous happens. According to the historical account, a clear, unmistakable, divine voice rings out for all to hear, descending upon the square and saying directly to the mystic, "Do not fear, son of Mansur." It's this profound, undeniable moment of direct intervention, right? A breathtaking sign of absolute truth shattering the mundane world. But here is where the chilling power of ideology completely takes over. The executioner hears this voice. He hears the literal, earth-shattering intervention of the divine. And yet, his hand never shakes. He doesn't pause to look at the sky. He doesn't question his actions for even a fraction of a second. The beating just continues with cold, mechanical precision. His internal ideological script simply doesn't allow for God to interrupt the execution. A scholar of the time, Sheikh Safar, actually observed this terrifying display and noted something incredibly profound. He said, "I had more faith in the executioner's ideological strength than the mystic's truth." I mean, think about the sheer weight of that statement. How much power must an ideological hold over a person's mind that they can hear a clear, divine command to stop, and their hand doesn't even tremble as they continue to strike? The executioner is a haunting metaphor for someone who is entirely melted down and recast into an ideological mold, stripped of all individual humanity. All right, let's step forward again, this time into literature, specifically to 19th century Russia. Our source brings up Fyodor Dostoevsky's deeply philosophical parable of the Grand Inquisitor from the Brothers Karamazov. It poses this ultimate earth-shaking hypothetical. What if Christ himself returned to earth during the brutal heights of the Spanish Inquisition? He walks quietly among the people, and with profound compassion, he begins to perform miracles once again. But what actually happens? The Inquisition, the very system built entirely in his name, funded by his teachings and claiming to act on his behalf, immediately steps in and orders his arrest. When truth physically manifests, the ideological system doesn't fall to its knees in worship. No way. Instead, it recognizes truth as a fatal threat to its earthly bureaucracy, its power, and its carefully constructed narrative. So, naturally, they throw him in a dark prison cell. In the dead of night, the Grand Inquisitor visits the cell. The atmosphere is just thick with dread as he looks at his prisoner. He asks, "Why have you returned to disturb us?" And then he makes this terrifying promise. "Tomorrow, I will burn you as the most dangerous of heretics, and the very people who kissed your feet today will, at my command, bring wood to your fire." The chilling reality here is that the system will gladly and efficiently execute the truth itself just to protect its own illusion. And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world consequences we still face today. When people's hearts and vision are sealed by a veil, they become the absolute pillars of dictatorship. They become completely blind to the corruption, the cruelty, and the institutional decay of their own systems. Honestly, no matter what atrocities they witness happening right outside their front doors, their belief in the ruling deceivers remains unwavering. It's like this psychological fortress that facts simply cannot penetrate. This brings us to a really vital distinction our source makes between two very different profiles, the mercenary versus the devotee. Now, the mercenary is quite simple. They're in it for the money, the status, or the personal benefit. When the cash dries up, or when the danger gets a little too real, they flee. In a dark sort of way, their greed makes them entirely predictable, and therefore somewhat manageable. You always know exactly where a mercenary stands, right next to the highest bidder. The ideological devotee, however, is infinitely more dangerous. Devotees will fiercely fight, kill, and die for their beliefs without a second thought. If they face a glaring contradiction, even a direct intervention from reality or God himself, they don't wake up, they simply ignore it. They twist logic into agonizing fallacies and perform breathtaking mental gymnastics just to protect the mud sealing their mind. Their loyalty isn't to logic or morality or even self-preservation. It is solely to the ideology itself. Which leaves us with a deeply uncomfortable thought to wrap up this explainer. We've judged the Egyptian victim, the executioner, and the inquisitor today. But what about us? What about the beliefs we hold on to so tightly that we refuse to examine them? If absolute truth stood directly before your most deeply held beliefs, would you have the clarity to recognize it? Or would you simply follow your ideology and start gathering the firewood? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you in the next explainer.